So, who would like to start?
To start, Bucky comes from the Jim Crow era and hasn't really socialized that much, whereas Sam is very much a Black man of this time. So what can these two stand to learn from each other as they embark on this global journey together?
Bucky's got to come out of his shell, you know what I mean? And learn to accept the past and move forward and get to know the world as it is, you know? And who else to better introduce him to that than Sam Wilson?
And I think both characters coming from where they came from and being the men that they are, they realize that the world has changed and evolved. The blip has put us in a position where we no longer are accessible to the way of thinking that was before the blip. That's what gave us Thanos. So both characters are smart enough to know that the future is different, and they've always been progressive enough to see that and move along with it.
Both Sam and Bucky are facing, from a personal place, issues that are very real world. Sam's family's in crisis, and Bucky is in his own crisis because he's dealing with guilt issues. He's got mental health issues. He's trying to navigate what the consequences of his actions are.
We say it like this. Bucky showed up with more baggage than any hero in Marvel history, right? And we took all that baggage and distilled it down to a single storyline and a single character that he's dealing with. If he fails, he is the monster that he worries he might be. And if he succeeds, he's reborn as someone that might actually be worthy of becoming a hero in his own right. Because in Bucky's mind, he's never been a hero.
And then we have, the discussion of the shield, because Sam was given the shield and he says, it doesn't feel like mine. And he has to decide if it is his. And what is it for a Black man to pick up that shield? There's both good and bad. What is it for the Black community? Is it relevant?
Sam's reaction to this shield is not what people expect. The journey in dealing with the stars and stripes is not an easy one for him. Rejecting it is hard and accepting it is extremely hard. You know what I'm saying? The stock he comes from, I don't want to spoil it, but there's a long legacy of Black folk who come from that stock. When you see these unique scenes that he has confronting these villains and you see him respond in a way that isn't typical for a superhero, the audience now will have a deeper understanding as to how, because they got to spend time in his personal life. And regarding Anthony, we stole a lot of his personal life to create that personal life for Sam.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
What are you excited for fans to see? Because this is the first time we're going to see them in this light.
Just for them to get to know them better, to spend a day in the life of Sam Wilson and Bucky Barnes as we haven't seen, and that actually ends up being much more relatable than all those epic times you've met them in the movies.
This episode confirms that, as Avengers, you don't really get paid for your work. I'm curious about what your reaction was when you saw that in the script, and do you think the Avengers should unionize for benefits?
I think that was called Civil War. No, we definitely should. I think, it's interesting. I always ask the question, when the Avengers show up, they destroy whole cities and just crush people. And what do they do for a living? Where does their money come from? I always believed it was Tony Stark and, because he owns, obviously he owns an Audi dealership somewhere. The idea of them making a living at what they do, I don't think that's the important thing. I think they do it for the betterment of the world, for saving people's lives. So they have their ins and outs, their odd jobs to make sure that they're taken care of. Government sponsorship, funding, government housing.
What was also nice and unexpected in this first episode was seeing Rhodey there, and just the mentor sort of mentee relationship with him and Sam, because they have so much in common. So can you just talk a little bit about what that relationship means in this series?
You said it. It's sort of got a bit of a mentorship kind of quality to it. It's also, very relevant to the story of Sam and the Shield and what he's going to decide. Rhodey is kind of posing the question, is there going to be a world where nobody carries the shield? Allies have become enemies and the world has changed. During the blip, obviously, there was a certain amount of cooperation, much like our pandemic, shared grief, shared loss. And so you had a world that was cooperating in a different kind of way. And now you're post blip, and all of a sudden people want it to go back.
We were all in love with the idea, like, you know, Marvel's two Black superheroes, the ones that are most well known anyway, because, you know, T'Challa is African. They are African American. There is a shorthand that they have together, you could imagine, you know what I'm saying, where all the issues Sam is coping with Don Cheadle, with the actors on that level, by them just pausing and being silent for a minute, the audience can fill in the blanks. And just having them two brothers on the screen at the same time, that was huge for me, man. I geeked out over that, you know?
Oh, yeah, because like outside of Black Panther, you don't get that moment, really.
That's right. And like I said, T'Challa and Black Panther basically shattered all the biases against Black heroes. But if we're talking about identity, T'Challa is a king and T'Challa is African. And though he does deal with some of the same issues that Sam and Rhodey might, they have a unique perspective on the world. And
we do know that Sharon Carter is going to be in this series. What can you say about her role and the dynamic with the team? She is not flipped out or crazy or nothing like that. But Sharon has, if the fans watch Civil War, they can fill in the blanks on what Sharon's probably had to deal with. And so when we meet Sharon, she has definitely evolved. The term I use is not dramatic, but she has definitely grown up. And obviously there's going to be a threat that brings the Falcon and the Winter Soldier together. So can you talk about what this threat is and how that sort of forces the Winter Soldier and the Falcon to sort of team up?
It's relevant to the blip and to, as I just said, the fact that the world has, you know, now enemies and our allegiances have changed, and it's all changed quite quickly. In the opening action sequence, we get a taste of what that is, that it's a bit unwieldy. And so we're going to discover through the course of the next episodes just what that means. We wanted the crisis that the heroes were dealing with to be something that every single fan could look at and be like, oh, I identify with that. That's a very real crisis. We wanted these villains to be born from that crisis, and we wanted our heroes to have to be approaching them from a point of view that is so human and so anchored in modern struggle today that this whole piece feels like the superhero franchise of the future. And finally, can we expect some Easter eggs or some, cameos to happen in this series? I know you can't say much, but what can you tease? Well, there's always Easter eggs. And what's wonderful about Marvel and MCU is each series is very much its own unique animal. So ours is very different from WandaVision. And obviously, one of Marvel's trademarks are the Easter eggs. What will be interesting to see if everybody catches them.